Pricing your home to list at the right price is one of the most important decisions you will make. And there are 5 mistakes that we see sellers make on a regular basis. They are assumptions that a seller might make that might be wrong. We're going to talk about the 5 things that impact price the most and what you need to be looking out for. Ultimately, at the A-List team, this is exactly what we're looking at when we look at prices and we advise our clients. And we're going to communicate with you on why we think your home is worth a specific value. The good news is you can price your home as high as you want, and eventually it will sell at that price. The only thing I can't guarantee is that you or I may not be alive to see it sell at that price at that time. So that's the challenge that we have with pricing. Really, pricing has 2 big risks. If we price too high, then we could see it sit on a market for a very long period of time. If the buyers in that market see a big price drop, then alarms go off in their head and they start to think, oh my, is there something wrong with that price? Why would the seller make such an extravagant decrease in their price? So maybe, does it have foundation issues? Does it have roof issues? And these are calls that I get as a real estate agent on a very regular basis when we see big price drops. So we want to avoid going too high and having to have a big correction in the price, as it can cause unneeded concerns in potential buyers in your market. The other thing you need to factor is that if you're priced way too high, most buyers are going to be coming with a loan. They're going to be buying a house and borrowing from a bank to buy that house. That lender is going to have that house appraised. If the house does get under contract and they agree to buy your house at the asking price that you have, but then the appraiser comes later and says, hey, look, this home is $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 less than what you have it under contract for, the buyer ultimately will either have to bring the extra money in cash, or most likely they're going to back out, because nobody likes overpaying for what the market is paying currently for in a home. So these are some things to keep in mind as you're going to get the max price. Is how much time are you going to spend selling and moving the property? We're going to dive into how we do that. And also, does it have a real likelihood of going through once you do get it locked up? And of course, nobody wants to price a home too low, because if you're pricing it too low, then you're leaving money on the table. Could be tens of thousands of dollars, not in your pocket, but in somebody else's pocket. So pricing is really a function of supply and demand. You have a supply of houses on the market at the time that you're gonna list to sell your home. And then you have a demand of buyers coming to look for houses in that specific area. Keeping this in mind, there are probably hundreds of thousands of buyers out there in America today, but a smaller subset is looking at Texas, and a much, much smaller subset is looking at the specific neighborhood that you live in and you're listing your home. They probably chose that neighborhood because they've already done a preliminary budget for a home that they're going to buy. They may like schools or specific amenities that are in that area, and they decided to look in your neighborhood. Those are the buyers that we're looking for. So when we look at pricing, we need to look at almost like there's 2 bell curves. On one hand, you have the buyers, and you have a bell curve of buyers. Some of them will be willing to pay a really high dollar count. Some of them will have the average dollar count, and some of them are low ballers. They're going to keep looking and looking and looking, and they may have a very hard time finding the house that they're looking for. On the other end, we have a different bell curve, which is we have a number of homes that are available. And in this case, we have sellers. And we have some that are very cheap homes that might be a good match for those. We have some that are average. And then we have some that are much more expensive in your neighborhood. So ultimately, what we need to figure out is when we're listing your home for sale, where does your home fall? And there's 5 reasons really that keep people from selling homes, or maybe listing too high and not finding the appropriate buyer that is going out there. Keeping in mind that there's less buyers up in this section, and there's many of these people will be willing to pay a lower price as long as the house is in good quality, right? So we're gonna talk about the 5 reasons as to what impacts the pricing of your home in this video. The first material impact to your home's price is the location. Yes, we're talking about all those smaller subset of buyers that are looking to buy in your neighborhood, but not all locations are the same. They might want specific things like a corner lot. Maybe it's zoned to a specific school, elementary, middle school, high school. Is your home in a flood zone and other homes not in a flood zone? Those all impact the location that they're looking for and ultimately the price they're willing to pay for that said location. The second material impact to your property's value is the property condition and the features of that home. Many times we'll see a buyer will set a search to find a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. Those will not be priced the same as a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, and it can vary from neighborhood to neighborhood if one is worth more than the other. It really depends on who lives in that neighborhood. Other factors can be upgrades. For example, having good granite countertops might be in really high demand, and having just basic countertops might be in high demand in your neighborhood. It really depends on what people are looking for in your area. A common mistake we see sellers make is they made a big investment into some feature in their home. And sometimes they think if I made this investment, then I should get X plus something. And that's not always the case. At the end of the day, the market pays a specific amount of money for specific features. And it's irrelevant to the money that you put into that. A common way we see this is with pools. Very regularly nowadays, you'll spend over $100,000 to buy a pool, and that pool might only bring $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in value to the property on the resale. So a lot of that value could be lost. Some features certainly do add value and others don't. So keep in mind when you're talking with your realtor to ask them what upgrades you've made, or if you're thinking about making investments in other upgrades, it may not be worth that investment to get the return. Let's take a look at the data to find that out. The third material impact to your home's price and the value it has in the market is obsolescence. So these are things that detract from the value of your home, or they could potentially add to the value of your home depending on how it sits in the market. The first is physical obsolescence, things that are broken in your home. For example, if you have a leak in a roof or a really old roof, it could be worth less than a house with a new roof. The second is functional obsolescence. Some things you can change and other things you can't change, and it may not always be worth the change depending on how much the investment is from your part. These are things like outdated things. For example, if a lot of houses are now with new kitchens or brand new bathrooms, all remodeled showers, and yours is not, it won't be worth the same amount of money. Other things could be layouts. For example, changing how the rooms flow or maybe low ceilings. Those things may not be worth the investment to change. It might be better just discounting your home to sell at a better price point, attracting more buyers. Other examples of functional obsolescence that make a big impact to price are things that back up to your property. For example, if you back up to an apartment building that has people looking down in your backyard, people who want to spend a lot of time outdoors won't be drawn to that property. Or if you have a business that's backed up to your house or a train that's backed up to your house, there will be a smaller number of buyers that are attracted to buying that house. And in having a smaller number of buyers means that you may need to decrease your price in order to attract that buyer pool to buy your house. The last form of obsolescence is economic obsolescence. These are things like changes in property taxes. If property taxes went up in your area, then of course the price of owning your home has gone up and you inherited that property tax hike, and that's going to impact the price of your home. Other things might be economic declines in specific neighborhoods. Maybe they're zoned to an area that had a really large employer, and now that employer is gone. It could dramatically increase the supply and ultimately impact the price of your home. The fourth area that is commonly overlooked and can have a material impact to the price of your home is comparable sales. If you recall the story we had in the beginning of the appraiser, if that appraiser comes and says to the buyer that's buying this property is not worth what you're under contract for, that is something that every buyer has a concern when you're getting a loan with the home, right? So if they're getting a loan with the home and they're coming to look at buying properties in your neighborhood, they're gonna have their buying agent look at all of the data of other homes that are sold near you. What is the price per square foot of homes of similar size square footage, similar bedroom count, so on and so forth? Because that's the information that an appraiser is gonna look at later and say, this is the value that your bank should approve a loan for. And that's how they're going to get to ultimately the step of buying your home. If they don't think they have a good chance of buying your home because you're priced too high, they're not going to move forward, right? So we're going to do a very in-depth analysis at the A-List team when we get your house listed for sale and look at what is the price per square foot here, what is the price per square foot here, what are the features and functions that might warrant you getting a higher price, and what are the features and functions that maybe detract and don't help you get top dollar. Can you change those things? And that's the conversation we're going to have when we work with you on picking a list price. Ultimately, this really boils down to the time you have in mind to sell and the conditions and life circumstances you have that need either a fast or maybe more time to get that top dollar sale and more money in your pocket. So comparable sales are super important. The one thing I'll get very regularly is, what if there isn't good data right now to show you? Because we typically like to look at data from the last 6 months. And you're right, lately we're now in 2025. We've seen some of the slowest real estate markets we've seen in many, many years. And sometimes in some neighborhoods, there just isn't a lot of data, right? So we might take several different approaches that other realtors might take or appraisers might take, looking back at historical data, looking back at trends. And we do a lot of different calculations to ultimately figure out a model where we could project a potential price point for your home. An example of that, we had a listing recently. It was in a subdivision that had a more relatively new home, maybe 2 years old homes. Unfortunately, there had only been one home that sold in that area in the last 6 months. And that person was in a hurry. They sold in that market. That house was under contract in less than a week. So they sold at a very low price, not helping my clients ultimately get the money that they needed in order to sell their property. But we looked at the neighborhood as a big trend, which had a lot of older homes surrounding that small subset. And we looked at the increase that that neighborhood had with those school zones and other things. And we made a model showing the percentage growth from one point to another. And then we applied that back to the purchase price of their home and other similar homes at the time when they purchased that. And from that, we were able to actually get an appraised value that was higher than any home that had ever sold in that neighborhood. That's because we were able to take a look at the data and show the appraiser that, hey, this is how this market is treating these homes in that area. And although there's no supporting comparables in this neighborhood, it's a very unique home for these specific reasons, and that's why it's worth more money. The fifth thing that can have a material impact to the price of your home is timing. The time of year that you list to sell and the time of year that you sell your home will ultimately change a lot. The houses that have the lowest price is always in January or February of any given calendar year. Pretty much as soon as you got a week before Christmas until mid-February, those will be the lowest priced homes that are sold in the greater Houston area, where we're based here at the A-List team. Now keep in mind that these homes were listed at least 1, maybe 2 months before the time that they sold. So if you're listing in October, November timeframe, you're not likely going to get as top dollar as you might if you were to list in March through June of any given calendar year. The peak seasons for prices are usually in that May to June timeframe, and that's because people are getting ready to ultimately buy and move during the summertime when their kids are out of summer. So they often will want to buy a house, move into that house over the summer, and then be in the new school system for when they start school here in August. So if you're really wanting to get top dollar, timing is something too that take a look at in terms of when you make that decision to move. I know life circumstances don't always permit that. That's why we have a real strategic approach to help people move properties. And yes, we have set record highs in neighborhoods in off months. It really comes down to how you present the property, how you market the property, and inform potential buyers of the features of the home. And that's really where we specialize, is bringing that care to help overcome each of these 5 reasons. So we've covered the 5 reasons. One other question I get quite regularly is, how do we strategize, right? Because a lot of pricing is strategy too. Do we list a little bit higher to allow them to negotiate down? Or do we list a little bit lower to have multiple offers and have them bid us up? Because, I mean, let's just face it. If you have a desirable property and there's multiple buyers that place an offer, they are gonna wanna buy your property and they will bid against each other to get you that top dollar. So what's the best strategy to approach this? It really depends down to a cultural thing. In some cultures, I know in Latin America where I grew up, we tend to typically start high price and let them negotiate us down because they really want a good deal, right? But in other cultures, that doesn't work always so well, and it could lead in a sale market. And that's really what we see for the most part in most markets here in Houston. It does depend a lot on the economy. So talk to your realtor and look at the data. We could show you in the data where we should price that strategy given the market in your neighborhood, right? But if you were to list, for example, a little bit higher than the average, if you have an average home based on those 5 things, then yes, that gives us a little bit of room to negotiate down. This might be good if you don't have a really hot seller's market. For example, if it's more of a buyer's market and you want to ultimately get that top dollar, you don't want to come in too low because you might just not get a multiple offer situation. But if you are in a hot market, yes, coming in maybe right at medium or coming in right below, for example, might get you bid up. And really knowing where to price it is going to come down to your agent's experience and how much activity and volume they're working on at that given time. So let's talk to you. We'll come up with a strategy that meets both your time goals and your money goals, because both of those go really hand in hand. And we'll see you at the closing table.